I want to talk about plagiarism for a minute, and the very nature of plagiarism is that when it's introduced, we jump to the conclusion that we're talking about specific events in which a student will misappropriate misappropriate material and try to pass it off as his or her own, rather than acknowledge the sources. But our problem here is begins with that, but it goes far beyond that. Our academic integrity definitions involve a definition of plagiarism representing the words ideas, or other works of another individual or entity as your own without giving proper credit. Self-plagiarism, which includes trying to use a paper that one has created perhaps for another course or earlier and using it over again, even though this is the work of the individual, using it in this way does constitute plagiarism. Then there's fabrication, which is also an AIV as far as this is the creation of material, whether it's a false source or false data, but of course it too is a violation. Uh, in terms of this material, the last item is the most interesting: poor scholarship. Poor scholarship is neither plagiarism nor cheating, since it can be clearly determined that the student did not intentionally mislead, but failed to appropriately paraphrase or correctly cite any other punctuation or error that might fall under the title of poor scholarship, or laziness, or ignorance, or anything else, is not an academic integrity violation. And that's the nature of the problem here rather than plagiarism per se. Our AIV department reports that in the last month there was a jump from an average of around 250 academic violations to 400. The problem is that many of those 250, much less 400, are not academic integrity violations. These people, some of whom have a high school education, draw it to our attention that, what do I do? This is not plagiarism. Should I proceed in dealing with the student, or should I email the instructor? What should I do? Something has to be done, because many of these, far too many of them, are not academic integrity violations. Two that came in this week and were called to my attention. One of them, the student directly names the source, and I'm not going to repeat the source, but let's say Dr. Carlos Baker. Following acknowledging the source, they have the quotation, followed by a parenthetical reference. However, they fail to put quotation marks around the direct words of Carlos Baker. This was turned in as an academic integrity violation. I hope that everybody listening understands that it's not. It's simply a punctuation error. The student failed to put punctuation marks in the correct place. That has nothing to do with an academic integrity violation. That is, I hate to say what it is, but it's certainly inappropriate. It is certainly a waste of time. And maybe it would not be inappropriate for the person to receive that to turn it around immediately and let the person on the other end know that clearly this is not an academic integrity violation, but rather a punctuation error. The problem is, in terms of protocol, that perhaps, a PhD on the receiving end might be a little upset that a person who has nothing but a high school diploma might have been able to judge that better than he or she did. So we're going to try to prevent that if we can. Our goal here is to have a better and clearer definition of plagiarism, what it is and what it is not, and that we can reduce the number of superfluous tickets that are received here with allegations of an academic integrity violation where absolutely none exists. Well, we don't have the time for that. Certainly the student doesn't need to be wrongly accused and upset and wonder, because many of these students really don't know whether they have committed an academic integrity violation or not, and rely on us and our expertise, to tell them that. The AIV department does not hesitate to say that Renee Curry is by far, the best instructor in terms of dealing with these situations. And what Renee has communicated to me in the last few days, that maybe her method might not be the best because it involves a great deal of time. Well, that's exactly what we're here to do and what we should be doing. She teaches the student when they make a mistake. She calls it to their attention exactly what they've done, exactly why this is not correct, and exactly what to do to correct this. This is what we should all be doing. If we are, to deal with this successfully, then we're going to have to eliminate many, many things. The first thing I suspect that it will take is a little bit more time. We also have to be willing to utilize these situations as a teaching moment, perhaps, if you'd like to call it that. But we are going to have to expend more effort. In 40 years, without a doubt, plagiarism is fairly rare. And I say plagiarism is fairly rare with a strict definition of plagiarism, because we have to work from the definition that what plagiarism is an absolute, incontrovertible fact that a student has appropriated something from another source and has attempted to pass it off in their work as their own. Without absolute fact, we don't have plagiarism. I learned this as a young instructor at the University of West Florida when I went to the dean, who was the head of dealing with instances of not just plagiarism, but other kinds of student unethical behavior. And the dean told me, he said, "John, the only thing that we proceed with is a case in which it is absolutely clear that this student has gone, obtained material, brought it in, and tried to pass it off as their own. And without that fact, there is no case, there is no plagiarism. It needs to be handled in another way, and that is up to the professor. Whether it's a punctuation problem, whether it is any number of problems that students are able to come up with. And I guess after 40 years of dealing with English papers, hundreds and hundreds every single month, I've seen virtually everything that's possible, and then probably some. We can't underestimate, what the student might do, but still, it's our responsibility to judge what they do and whether it's a legitimate AIV violation or not. And again, as I say, at this point, we're going to have to do a better job of that. I would say two things. Number one, if it's absolutely certain that the student got this material from another source and is attempting to pass it off as his or her own, obviously it's plagiarism. There's not the slightest doubt about it. We will prosecute that. We have dismissed students here because of repeated behaviors that can be verified that that is exactly what they're doing. We do not have a problem with that. It's unfortunate. We would like to think that the student could get some advice early on that this behavior is unacceptable and that it will ultimately lead not only to a failing grade but to dismissal if it persists. That's clear. That has to be in place, and that is not what we're talking about today. The obvious goal of maintaining student integrity is something that we have to support individually and we have to support as an institution. But still, we're going to have to do a better job at the instructor level in terms of discernment, what is and what is not plagiarism. I would say this, and I have been in this position many, many, many times. If, in dealing with a paper, there is any doubt, then at that point it's not plagiarism. The only plagiarism is that which can be completely verified. Whether it's through Turnitin, it doesn't make any difference. If it's verified, it's plagiarism. If we're sitting there reading and we suspect, because of the inconsistencies in tone, because of the level of vocabulary, any number of things that might lead you to believe that a student has obtained this material from another source, regardless of our suspicions, if it cannot be absolutely proven, it is not plagiarism. You have to deal with it in some other way than an AIV violation. So, that being said, in summary, we're going to have to do a little bit better with dealing with these students. Hopefully, it's going to be at the level of instruction in terms of if things they are doing are skirting or flirting with plagiarism, they need to be made aware of it, but they have to have a full explanation. It is a fact, as you know, that many of these students do not understand some of the things they can and cannot do. They have to be told. Many times they're only going to be told after they have made an error. But genuinely, this error in many cases is not an AIV violation, nor is it plagiarism. Another case that was brought to my attention this week was a student turned in for an AIV violation who lacked a source. Now, some of the papers that I assign have 5 sources, all of which are expected to appear on a reference page, all of which, therefore, must be quoted one time in the body of the paper. At various times, a student might turn in 3 or 4 rather than 5. Obviously, this is not plagiarism. If it is inconsistent with the specifications for the paper and the requirements, then we have to deal with them another way, but not as an academic integrity violation, which it is not. So, I encourage you, please, to have more discernment. Team leads, please communicate to your faculty that we are going to have to do a better job of this, because what's going to happen is that as these things come in that are clearly not academic integrity violations, somebody, whether it's me or a lead or a department chair or an assistant provost, somebody, perhaps a person with a high school diploma, is going to have to return these things to the instructor with a note that I'm sorry, but they are not academic integrity violations, and you're going to have to handle this in another way. And that's very important to all of us here. Please, I encourage you, if you have any questions, whether I can answer them or not, whether I have to go higher or lower to get your answer, I'll be happy to do so. But if this were not important, I would not be here, and we would not be spending the time to deal with this situation. But thank you very much for your consideration and attention.